Aldo Manzi here. Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My guest in this episode is drummer, longtime friend, and entrepreneur, Mr. Rob Birenbaum. And remember to like and subscribe. Mr. Rob Birenbaum. Hello, Rob. Thanks so much for being on the show. Before we talk about the theme of shaping your journey, and of course, we all have a version of that same story, and it's really interesting to see. Many of us have been drummers and then expanded where we went from there, and the road we've taken, the decisions we've made, the people who helped out. Before we talk about shaping your journey from your perspective, tell us just a little bit about like where it started, where that first spark came from, which led you to where you are,
Sure.
what you became.
Good to see you, Aldo. Thanks for inviting me. So, like a lot of people from my era, it can all be traced back to February 9th, 1964, the night that the Beatles were first on U.S. television. And that really was kind of the first modern cultural viral event before that term was ever used about anything outside of medical. I mean, there was no internet. There were 3 television stations in the U.S. There were a couple newspapers, 1 or 2 newspapers in every city. There were a few magazines, but somehow this incredible groundswell developed about the Beatles. And I know you like to ask what got people on their journey, so I actually did a little research, and the Ed Sullivan Show normally drew about 40 million people in the U.S., which was a lot.
Right.
The night the Beatles were on, 73 million people watched, and the U.S. population was 191 million at that time. So that's like 38% of the country was watching. And if you extrapolate that to today, it would be like 128 million people, which is more than watch a Super Bowl. So it was just a cultural earthquake event. And, like many young boys, unfortunately, girls weren't that involved in music at the time. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a drummer after that. So, there's a direct line from my life. And it's true of so many musicians. It's true of the music industry. That night changed the musical instrument industry because it used to be what was called band and orchestra, brass and winds and marching band, percussion. And then almost overnight, it changed to what's now called combo: guitars, amps, drums, portable keyboards. And that was a huge paradigm shift because the manufacturers all of a sudden had this demand that they couldn't meet, whether they were making drums or cymbals or guitars or amps. And they were putting in like 2, if not 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, 16 hours a day, just to keep up with the orders. Yes. So that's kind of what set me on the road. And like so many of us, I played in bands, as a teenager, and I started teaching. But I went to college. I thought I would be like in educational or social psychology research, that type of thing. And I got a job in a drum shop in 1973 when I was like a junior in college. And I worked there and I had a good experience. I did well at it. And I kind of learned what to do in business, but I also learned what not to do in business because the company was spiraling down, and I quit to go to graduate school, and it closed 2 or 3 months later, which had nothing to do with me leaving. I mean, it was on the road to ruin anyway. but I always had this in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something in the music industry, even though I played in a lot of bands and,
Right.
I was playing regularly. I was an average to above average drummer. I knew it wouldn't be my career. Um, so I got my master's. I started working in the research field. And after about 5 years, I just had that, I don't know if it was an epiphany or I finally just resigned myself to accept the fact that a bad day around drums would be better than a good day doing research. So
Yes.
I opened drum headquarters in 1981.
In St.
And
Louis. In St. Louis,
that's,
right?
yeah, in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And, I kind of got a map out, and I put push pins and I put them in every place where there was a music store that had a strong drum department, because that was a thing back then. Full line music stores would have a good drum department, and drum shops were rare. And so I, mapped out the city, and I saw an area which fortunately was right in the central county near the city line where I was most active, where I lived, where I played, where I knew people. And that just was the crying out for a music store. So
Right.
that's where I opened the first location.
Nice. Let me just interject, 'cause I want to go back just a little bit. Those of us who watched that Ed Sullivan show that night. I mean, your statistics are maybe just in the U.S., but I think globally,
Right, right.
worldwide,
I know.
it must be like totally off the charts.
Yeah.
And I still remember. I mean, I don't know if I was 10 or 11, but I still remember that night like it was yesterday.
Yep.
And I also remember the next morning, we all, maybe it was the same thing for you. And I have this conversation with Greg Bizanet and a bunch of others who had exactly the same. And we compared notes, and it was like we all read the same script.
Right.
The next morning, you went to school, and we were all singing the songs. And then I think back, I said, how did we do that? And then, all the books would come out with the songs, with the words.
Right.
Within 1 week, everybody, no, 1 week, I think it was just days, where everybody had the words, and we would sing in the schoolyard. We would
Right.
play at somebody's house. Nobody played it in his, I certainly didn't. All my friends didn't. And then we'd just hang, and we'd have like brooms. I was John Lennon first.
Ah,
And then, and we replicated the very
sure.
next day. Isn't that something, Rob?
Right. Exact same experience. I mean, the first time I did it, we actually faked it, like at like a school dance or something, where they'd play the record and we would act like we were playing, but it was the same exact thing.
Wow. Unbelievable. And then the second thing that comes to mind, and this is really incredible. I don't believe in coincidences. So when things happen, I like they're meant to be. And okay, now get through this. So for example, imagine we're 1963, okay? 60 at that point, they're only making so many drums. They're still
Right.
using probably calf heads, right? Right?
Much. I mean, the plastic heads were introduced in 57, but it took a while for them to
Yes. So
take hold.
I remember hearing the story where DuPont went to Chicago, and there were a few people who had heard the story, one of them being Remo, who said, we developed this plastic. Can you guys do something with this? And then there's Jake Evans, and then Remo, and then there was that race of who could make it.
Right.
So that took a while. But all of a sudden, overnight, I mean, they were selling like 10, 15,000 drum sets a month or a week. I don't know the
It
statistics.
was crazy, though. I've talked to Mr. Ludwig, the late Mr. Ludwig, about it, and yeah, it was just an unbelievable experience. He didn't know what to make of it.
But then the question is, can you imagine if at that moment they hadn't developed the plastic drum head? There would be no cows left.
Right.
I mean, it would have been impossible. So
Yes.
this juxtaposition of the plastic hedges coming in and being developed, and all of a sudden this thing happened, which was like a
The
hurricane.
timing, you're right. The timing was perfect.
That's-
It wouldn't have
I,
developed otherwise.
I had these long conversations with Remo Belli about it, and
Huh?
like he was just shaking his head. He says, "We were just racing all of us. It was,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Remo talked about they took so many orders the first time they went to a NAMM show, but they didn't say no. They just said yes. Then they got back to LA and they had to figure out, now how the heck are we going to make these? How are we
Right,
going to
right.
make 10,000 drum heads? We only know how to make 10, you know. So
That's incredible. But I mean, it's interesting. Like all of us have our own, at one point we realized, where am I best suited to be in this big picture? I mean, some of us played, some of us taught, some of us, you went into the store. And
right.
in that store in St. Louis, it was interesting because I came across, we crossed paths only because when we started the COSA music,
Uh-huh.
the camps and all the workshops, I ran across your pad,
Right.
and with Jim Chapin and of course Dom that
Sure.
had it, and I said, "Oh, we should get this guy involved." So I would call you and say,
Right.
"Remember that?" I would call you and I'd say, "What else do you do that we can help you promote what you do, because this is a great thing." And Jim is like permanent faculty,
Right.
Jim Chapin, and it was great to see. So, what's the story like? What made you go into that as you're running a drum shop?
Right. Well, so I opened the store in 81 and uh, 5 or 6, things were going well. We had moved to a bigger location and, around 87, I started thinking about what I could do to expand. And I had some really good employees. I needed to keep them engaged. And I didn't think at the time that a second store was the way to go, even though I eventually opened a second store. But that early, I was just a little cautious about that. And I mean, this is another one of those inflection points. So in '84, Tama put Simon Phillips on the road for a 1 week clinic tour. And Simon was fairly well known, but not the name recognition he has now. People knew him for Stanley Clarke and Jeff Beck. He hadn't done the Pete Townsend stuff yet, but he was still a fairly major name. And Tama, to their credit, saw Dom Famulero's potential. Dom was teaching at Long Island Drum Center. Long Island was a strong Tama dealer. Uh, they met Dom. They saw what he was all about. But at that point, he had only done clinics in schools. I mean, he'd done
Right,
hundreds, but he'd only done school clinics on Long Island. He'd never been out of New York to do a clinic.
right,
So Tama put him on this tour. There were only 7 dates, and they chose our store for one of them, which was also a major event to help Drum Headquarters. But the clinic day came. We sold almost 400 tickets. Not one person was there for Dom. Nobody knew who Dom was.
right.
I introduced him. He came out, and in 5 minutes, he had the audience eating out of his hand. And in
Right,
20 minutes, they were screaming for more.
right.
And I'm standing off to the side of the stage, and I didn't for a minute foresee what Dom became, but I'm standing here thinking, this is a special guy,
Yes.
something about this guy. Um, so, we connected immediately, and one of our teachers just was enamored with what Dom presented. And he said, "Can I come to New York and study with you?" And Dom said, "Sure." So Mike went to New York and spent the weekend with Dom and Chapin. And he comes back with this round gum rubber practice pad, no name, no label, no nothing. And he says, "This is the pad that I want to start recommending for my students." And Mike was teaching 30 or 40 students a week at the store. And I knew a little bit about it, but it was like $25 in 1984 or 85. And I go, "Mike, you really think we can sell a $25 practice pad?" And
Wow.
he said, and he wasn't trying to put any pressure on me. He wasn't that kind of guy. He goes, "Well, if you don't want to stock them, I'll order them from Long Island Drum Center." Well, that's all he had to say. I go, "No, no, no, I'll order them." So I order 3 and we sell them. I order 6 and we sell them. I order 12 and we sell them. Fast forward 4 years later, I bought the company. And it was owned by Jerry Rickey, who founded Long Island Drum Center. His brother Dennis runs it now. They've been in business for close to 50 years. And but they were only selling it in the Northeast, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. They finally came up with a name. They called it Power Play. They made a smart move by switching from a round shape to an octagon, which was a good product identifier. So I bought the company and I changed the name to HQ Percussion Products. I thought HQ was quick to remember, kind of like DW, which also wasn't at the position they are now. And then HQ tied into Drum Headquarters. It kind of had a family
Right.
connection. But we changed the name of the products. So we named the practice pad RealFeel, the one you have sitting there. They had this thing called drum mufflers, and we changed it to Sound Off. And they didn't have a bass drum size model. They didn't have cymbal models. They didn't have hi-hat models. So we introduced all that stuff. And just from having had a retail store, I kind of felt that I could market accessory type products because I knew what appealed to consumers and how to appeal to them. I mean, I can remember vividly all the times customers would come in and ask for something we didn't have. I mean, they weren't a half a minute out the door, and I was already thumbing through Modern Drummer looking for the phone number of
Yes.
the company so I could call and get the product. So we kind of wanted to generate that same
Right.
kind of interest level. So it's so cliche to say, and people say it all the time, and they say it so much that it has no meaning anymore. But it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
I had this relationship with Dom. Mike, our teacher, had the relationship with Dom. That led to Dom coming to the store many, many times to teach, do master classes, sometimes just to work with our teachers one-on-one or in little groups to help develop our lesson program. And that led to me, buying what became HQ Percussion. And I mean, Dom made the pitch.
Right.
We got the hit. I mean, there's no question that all my guys are the reason for making this thing happen, having made this thing happen. But we wouldn't have got the hit if Dom didn't make the pitch.
Right.
So it was that relationship,
Sure.
and people lose sight of that. And you know that from being a player. People want to work with the people they want to work with.
Of course. Of
And
course.
you make yourself indispensable for more reasons than just your ability.
Yeah. No. Also, and that's the other thing I also impart to my students because I also teach a lot. I mean, it's really important how people feel. So, I mean, people feel on stage with you.
Right.
That's
Right.
super important because otherwise there's no reason for you to be there. There are 100 other people who could do what you do. Maybe
Yes.
we have something special, and that's always a given. But it's our responsibility to be part of somebody else's success. How do you make them feel really good, make them look good, and when it's your time to shine, you do that. But be
Right.
part of
Right.
somebody's success. That's like a mantra.
Right.
And also, I mean, at COSA, the whole time, everything is, remember, you can be the greatest player, but there are other people in the room. You're on tour with people, or you're teaching, and it's what you instill as values and
Mm-hmm.
your value as a human being and as a player and a person of inspiration. And that should be part of it. Unless you have a personality that's totally negative, well, then you should be doing something about that because,
Right. Right. Right.
whether you're a store or you're on stage or you're teaching, I mean, the personality, life. We're so fortunate to be alive and so fortunate to be playing music and playing
Uh-huh.
drums. How cool is that?
Right.
You know,
I mean, exactly what you're saying. Consider someone like Kenny Aronoff. No question, he's got the goods. He's
yes,
got his own sound. He comes impeccably prepared. But he gets hired. There's other people that do that. He gets hired over and over and over again because he makes everybody else feel good. He puts out a good vibe in the studio or on the road.
oh yes,
He's easy to work with. He's there to make you better, and people just underestimate the importance of that, because
Yeah.
like in Kenny's case, he's working in a lot of high pressure situations. Recording in a studio is high pressure enough, but he's done a lot of these award shows and tribute shows where there's not a lot of time to
Yeah.
rehearse. People are stressed, and he has the ability just to make everybody feel good, feel comfortable. They can rely on him, personally, emotionally, and musically. And that's one of the reasons he and many others who are the same way get called back over and over again.
No, for sure. And in the case of Kenny, I know Kenny very well. I mean, he and I, did sessions together. We would play, and I would be playing percussion, and it's just the work ethic.
Yeah,
You're so prepared, and don't forget, Kenny is a classically trained percussionist
right,
who could have gone
right,
that. He had that on that level,
exactly.
and he decided to do drum set, which made him a much better drummer, more musical drummer. So he had that work ethic. And then when you're working with that level of people that are right away, it's solution like fun. Make this work. Of course, you're responsible because there's a lot of people, a lot of money on
Uh-huh.
this.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, when we had him at Costa a number of times, and it was funny when he came out in Vermont once. I walked into his mother came out to see him.
Ah,
Okay, it's fun. It was funny. I walked into because during the day we'd have all of these classes, and then in the
uh-huh.
evening we'd have concerts open to the public. So the sound crew would do the sound checks in the afternoon, would get those
Uh-huh.
people ready. I walk in and I into to the theater where we were doing the concerts. Well, Kenny's doing his sound check, and I walked over to the sound guy who's kind of there and I'm looking at the board and I'm saying, "How's it going, Ezra?" And he just points to the board. All the pots were down, like to zero.
Uh-huh.
I don't need to do anything. His mother walks in and says, "Boy, I wish Kenny wouldn't play so loud."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But he feels the tape, he feels the track, he feels the
Right,
room
right.
with yes, and every style. I mean, he's
Sure.
unbelievable.
Yeah. Now you bring up a good point about his classical training. He had a background in having to dive in and drill down,
Sure.
whether it's a marimba piece or a timpani part, and he was then able to apply
Yes.
that discipline, because he's a really driven person, which is
Yes.
also a special character quality you need. But he was able to apply that because he had done it before.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
Well, that training of being so focused and so driven is
yeah,
a good word, and that's I like that.
yeah,
I mean, I would even say like you were driven as well. I mean, in what you were doing, you have the shop, then you have these practice pads that have become so universal. I mean, I still have my,
right. You've
this
got
is an
that's
original
an
still,
original. I can
and
tell.
oh yes, it's an
That's probably
original.
1990s.
And I have one that Chapin gave me. I have one that
Right.
Kenwood Denard gave me. I
Yeah,
signed it. Of course, I can't use it because they're all signed. Then it's Aldo here.
sure.
Thank you so much. It's been so nice working with you. And then, of course, you that pad, that practice pad, you sold it to the Dario Evans,
Dario.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. After about 15 years, I kind of felt that we'd taken it really as far as we could take it. Um, and I mean, we did a heck of a lot with it, but there were people who were better at marketing, better at packaging, better at manufacturing. Raw materials were going up. We had fended off a lot of competition, a lot of copycats. We were still in a really strong position, but before it got eroded, which I thought would eventually happen, that's kind of why I made the decision. And D'Addario Evans was a great choice. I spoke to a few companies that were interested, but they kind of distinguished themselves in just their business operations, and uh, and they hung with it. They hung with it, and we were able to make the deal. So that was 2004.
And four.
January.
Wow.
It was the end of 2003. They took over early 2004. So I had it for 16 years, and now they've had it for 21.
Nice.
So it's kind of good to see that it's still out there.
Yeah. And but you continued your shop after that.
I
Did you?
owned the store until 2005.
Okay.
So in an 18-month period, I sold HQ Percussion, and then I sold Drum Headquarters to one of my longtime employees. And unfortunately, it went out of business 6 years later. So it went out of business in 2011.
Okay. You also had the whole internet phenomena, the whole online
Right.
business, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah,
everything
that kind
else.
of what did not really take hold until I sold. We were very cautious about having Drum Headquarters get into the internet early because we didn't want to compete with our HQ Percussion customers. We were selling the RealFeel and Sound Off to virtually every drum shop in America and
Right.
hundreds around the world. And we didn't want to sell online to compete with our customers. It was a delicate
Sure.
balance. And even though everybody knew that Drum Headquarters and well, not everybody, but eventually people caught on that it was the same company, but we treated them, we kept them. There was a firm line of demarcation between the two companies. Um, we did not sell Real Field products to consumers for the same price we sold to dealers, which would have cut them out of the equation.
Sure.
So we were real sensitive about that. So I kind of stayed away from the internet in the beginning for that reason.
Right.
But yeah, there's no question that that was the next major paradigm shift in the industry, as we've all seen in
Huge.
the last 20 years.
Yes. Yes. And then you also got out of the shops business and you're into the real estate, which is really interesting.
Yeah, Drum Headquarters moved to a neighborhood that a historic neighborhood, a municipality right outside of the St. Louis city limits. And these kind of neighborhoods are all over the world. They were the strong retail center back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then they got choked off by shopping malls and people moving out to the suburbs. And these neighborhoods died. So the neighborhood that I moved Drum Headquarters to is called Maplewood, was like one of the top two shopping districts in St. Louis in the 50s and 60s, and then it was desolate. But it didn't really matter because Drum Headquarters was so specialized. You know, it was
Right.
on a major street. Everybody knew where it was. Um, People would go where the best barbecue was, so to speak. So I
Right.
figured I would move there. And I started meeting other business owners and city personnel, and people who wanted to try to bring the neighborhood back. And I just kind of got involved in that. And, another relationship thing, I met a guy who had bought a building in another similar neighborhood somewhere else like 10 years prior. And then the neighborhood exploded. So he had a vision. He saw this neighborhood, Maplewood, and he thought this could be like here. So he approached me and said, we need to make this happen. We need to buy a building. I'm going, what are you talking about? Buy a building? I'm a retailer. I'm not going to buy. Plus, I'm mechanically handicapped. I can't fix anything. The employees kept me away from any repair at the store. Don't get me near tools. I'll hurt myself or I'll ruin the piece of merchandise. I said, I'm not a property owner. So he lured me in and we bought a building and rehabbed it. Uh, and he owned a restaurant on one end of the strip. It's only it's a bigger, it's only a 10,000, 9,000 population municipality, but there's this 2-block core downtown district with all these buildings
Right.
from 1900 to 1920, let's say. I'm sure you
Wow.
can visualize that
Yes.
in
Yes.
Montreal and many other cities you've been to. And they were half vacant and half occupied by less than desirable people. So he had the guts to put a 10,000 square foot restaurant on one end of the
Wow.
2 block strip, and I had drum headquarters on the other end. And we bought this building in the middle, and I just kind of followed his lead. Uh, and after about 2 or 3 years, we bought another building and got a restaurant in there. Um, and then he said, I'm going to move to Orange Beach, Alabama, because he had a background of sailing. He had sailed around the world for 8 years once before I met him. And so he kind of left me there. We owned the 2 buildings together, and he was still very helpful, but he was gone. And I saw what was going on, and I had this Jones, and I got myself up to 5 buildings.
Wow.
Eventually bought him out because he wanted to do some stuff in Alabama. And so that's when I sold Drum Headquarters, because I don't have children. So I didn't really, I mean, I could have waited 5 years or 10 years, but I had a long-term great employee who had 2 kids, like under the age of 15. And I thought, if I wait any longer, these kids are going to be in college. He's not going to be able to do this. So, and I
Yeah.
wanted to, focus on the property. So I sold Drum Headquarters in 2005. And then over the next 10 years, I went from 5 buildings to 16 buildings, all
Wow.
within that 2 block area. And a lot of other stuff was going on. It was a real organic team effort of, corporate. There was 1 or 2 corporate entities in the city, in that little municipality, and then a bank, and then the city hall, the elected officials and the appointed officials, and some other property owners and business owners. And we all kind of pushed this thing ahead. And now it's, one of the most desirable restaurant and boutique shopping districts. And, 20 years ago, it was desolate.
Sure. Sure.
So that's kind of what I've gotten into. I've kind of pulled back a little. I starting around 2017, I started selling buildings that were not in my core mission. So I've got 11 buildings now that are all within those 2 blocks, all on the same side of the street, all between 100 and 120 years, 125 years old. Um,
Nice.
and I've got 7 restaurants and a bunch of specialty shops, and all independent, creative young, operators. So it's that's kind of been really fun.
Nice. I mean, that's quite a journey from the drummer to the
Right,
octave to the
but it wouldn't happen if I didn't fall in love with the Beatles.
yeah. No, no,
I'm
you're
telling.
absolutely right. And it's the whole
I would
creative.
probably be, well, I'd be retired by now, but I would probably have been, like an educational researcher or something. I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. It
Yes.
just thought, it's interesting to look back on, and I always encourage people, because I have a lot of communication and good relationship with all my tenants, that you don't know where this is going to lead. Um, you
Right.
know, look for the other opportunity, but I encourage them to stay within their core business,
Right.
their core expertise, their core interest. And that's kind of what I did when I went from Drum Headquarters to HQ Percussion. I mean, it was, again, very specialized.
Yeah.
90% of our sales were RealFeel and Sound Off, which were practice devices. We were
Right.
so hyper focused,
Right.
that enabled us to compete. And the same thing with Drum Headquarters. There were numerous times where sales reps, because a lot of sales reps that have a drum line have a guitar line,
Right.
and they would say, because they're working for a commission, but it was they had the right intentions, but they're going, why don't you take on guitars? And I'm going like,
Yes.
well, no, that would like dilute Drum Headquarters. if we took on guitars. We wouldn't be so specialized and looked at as the experts and the destination and all that. So I kind of rejected all those kind of overtures over the years and stayed within, even in the real estate thing. Not only am I only in one city, I'm only on one street on 2 blocks. I'm just completely focused on those things, and that
Focused.
for me, that's what works best. I don't like this huge diversification and extension thing. I just don't think I would be good at that.
Yeah, and you have a much better control of what you're doing if you're
Exactly.
totally focused and you are in your house, so to speak. But the interesting thing that you brought up is this word relationships. It's like we spoke about earlier. It's really that decision, understanding what relationships means, like making people feel good. I mean, if you're going to raise somebody's rent, well, I mean, you have to have a strategy of not just taking people for all they have and make as much money as you can. No, it's all about making the thing work so that everybody's happy, right?
Right, right, right. I
I
don't
mean,
want to churn through tenants. It was like I was with employees. I had a lot of long-term employees. I don't want to be churning through tenants. I want them to succeed,
sure.
and to get the long term, you got to give them time to get traction. To get the long term out of them, we've got to work together on that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely my philosophy.
Yeah, and it's this when I this whole I mean some of the mantras that we have. One of the things for me has become how can I help? It's like the first thing you say, how can I help? And if somebody
Hmm.
comes to you, for example, I mean, if it's a drum lesson, how can I help? If it's when I reached out to you, as far as I said, we have to have these practice pads here, and you're always so supportive. And it was, how can I help? Because you have an idea behind this, so it worked for
Right,
everybody. And then when you have
right,
tenants, and they're just starting a business, if you don't give them the chance, and if you're not as helpful as you can for their success, then there's no room for, and there's no royalty, not royalty, but
right,
loyalty built. As
right,
a friendship loyalty. That, I mean, yes, business, but there should be that kind of loyalty. Being thankful that somebody took a minute to speak about or gave you the time to put it together and gave you the space, which in this case, I mean, for me, I don't see the differences in whatever one does. The principles are always the same.
exactly, right, totally,
Yeah, I've always thought
totally,
that. I mean, I don't care. I mean, I dabble in real estate too, but the principles are all the same. Whether you're dealing with humans, whether you're playing with instruments on
right,
stage, you just be thankful that you can do this. And how do you continue this so that everybody's okay? If you do a great concert, people will come to your next one. If
right,
you
right.
whatever you do, and that's always been, even when we did the COSA stuff in the States, or anything we do, whether it's in Cuba or whether it's overseas. I mean, we're doing this with one in Italy. How can you
Mhm.
make people come out of there just wanting more? Because everybody should be winning, right? All the time.
Right, right. No, that's my mantra is that the high tide raises all ships. Everybody, if everybody succeeds, we're all in a good place.
Yeah,
And the proof of that was during the pandemic. I had 26 tenants, and I only lost one, and that was, I mean, we suffered together, but we were in it together, and uh,
sure,
that's, I mean, I had great relationships anyway with my tenants, but that solidified it
sure,
for the long term because I was there with them to get
true.
through it.
Yeah,
And the only one I lost was actually even a year after things kind of settled down, but they were also the sloppiest operator, and they just could not pivot. They just could not respond, and it was
right.
really inspiring to see these businesses, whether they were retail stores or restaurants, how they responded to this challenge, I
Sure.
mean, it was really impressive.
Yeah.
They were doing things they'd never done before, creating new profit centers. And some of them have carried on some of those things now that we're hopefully out of it. There's still some remnants around there, but generally we're out of it. Um, but yeah, that was quite an illuminating experience for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Oh no, for
That was
sure.
rough.
And I think for many people on many levels, it was like first question, okay, how do we hold on? How do we get
Hmm.
through this? Because I mean, for example, I'm touring the world. We have these coast workshops all over the planet. The year of COVID was technically our biggest year, but we spent 3 months refunding everybody from all our programs, from all our
Hmm.
everything,
Yeah.
plus canceling my own. I was doing a book tour for my book,
Uh-huh.
the Cuban rhythms for
Uh-huh.
percussion and drum set book.
Sure.
I mean, everything just flat out, and not even an airplane. Never mind taking an airplane, seeing an airplane,
Yeah.
right? And figuring it out. So I mean, and most of us with our creativity and we found a way to get through it, as we all do.
Sure.
Humans always find a way out of these things if they're sincere, if they're sincere about what they do, and then people will listen and say, hey, the collective. You can't do things necessarily only on your own. So as a collective, everybody holds everybody up a little bit so that it works. I mean that's incredible. Now that you own all of these buildings, do you still play drums?
I play about 15 gigs a year with some friends at the most.
Nice.
I really kind of stopped playing. It was funny. I was playing a lot the 2 or 3 years before I opened Drum Headquarters, and then I continued to play for the first 6 months. But I had virtually no employees or a part timer, and I can vividly remember, like on a Thursday night, hoping that at 10 to 8 that a customer didn't come in so I could get to the gig on time. And that was one of those moments, those light bulbs, like, wait a minute, I can continue to be a halfway musician, or I could try to be a whole business person. But you can't be in business hoping that customers don't come in. So I actually stopped playing in June of that first year of Drum Headquarters so I could devote time to it,
Sure.
because I just had to decide. And I knew, like I said earlier, I was a serviceable drummer. I was better at keeping the band together, which is a part of the drummer's role, much better at booking the best person in the band to book the band, which is probably, you know, how I ended up in business, one of the ways I ended up in business. But I knew that playing, even though I enjoy it, I knew that. And that's the thing that we would impress on, parents. When MTV hit real heavy, parents would really come in with some caution about signing their kid up for drum lessons, because they'd see these wild videos, whether it was Motley Crue or Van
Right.
Halen, whoever it
Yes.
was. And I had many conversations with parents about, there's a ton of things your kid can do with drumming. He can become a lawyer, but he can
Sure.
still play at church, or he can play in a wedding band, or he can play in community theater, or he can play with his friends in the basement, or 100 other things. And that was an interesting phenomenon. But people, I mean, it's like, you can play basketball and enjoy it. How many are going to end up in the NBA? It's not
Of
even
course.
1%. It's infinitesimal, but they still can enjoy it. And parents had to understand that
Sure.
music is the same, could be the same way.
Of
Um,
course. Of course.
but that was interesting terrain to navigate back
Sure.
then.
And
And then there were also people, celebrities, athletes, or entertainers who we knew played drums, and we say, "Well, do you know that Johnny Carson plays drums, or the local weatherman plays drums on the local NBC affiliate?" Oh no, I didn't know. Yeah, it's a great
that's it. Yeah.
hobby to have. Um,
Yeah.
So that was an interesting phenomenon then.
Yes. Well, we always had, I mean, as teachers, I mean, we always have that conversation because they look at you and they say, is my son or my daughter doing the right thing? And can they make a living out of it? Can they do so? You have to list what the possibilities are. If you go far, you make a living, and to one, I'd say, well, you know, you live 2 blocks from my house, right? And you're both doctors, and you're doing well. I mean, I play drums, I play percussion, and I my house is as big as yours. So that tells you
Uh-huh.
something. But also, you can on weekends you don't have to play necessary golf or go rob somebody when
Right.
you're a child. That's
Yeah.
my father used to be happy because he would see me with drums. He says some other kids are out stealing cars.
Uh,
So
right.
thank God. And that gets you through that part. And then later you just become a more educated audience if you don't play. And it's so much more interesting for them when you're going somewhere to understand what's going on. And also you feel so much better. It's a whole other world. So when you go through that whole cycle of
Right.
possibilities, and if you really want to play and they have the stomach for it, the patience for it and understanding what it takes, hey, we still need musicians forever.
Right.
You
Right.
know?
And how many come back to it who, we had a lot of customers who'd be 30 or 40 and they'd come in and they'd say, I played drums in high school and I loved it, but then I went to college, I got a job, I
Yes.
got married, I had kids, I got away from it for 10 or 15, maybe even 20 years, and then they dive back in.
Yeah.
So it can be a lifelong pursuit.
Sure. And some people
Sure.
even start late. I mean, recently at our school at the Koza Academy, somebody called and said, I just retired and I always wanted to play drums, never had the time. I'm 65 years old. Do you think it's too late? And
Oh,
that was just a few months ago. And now when I see him coming to the lessons, he is so charged up.
right.
And and then the better they get, even at that age, and I would say, if there's something you really, really want to do, you will succeed for yourself. And then people will make comments, and then you get together with friends, and it doesn't have to be necessarily at the bar. It can be,
Yeah,
but
right,
you can also
exactly. Yeah,
play.
people are all some people are only aware of what's visible to them. They don't think about all the other applications. And
Sure.
one thing you mentioned, which made me think, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is the great increase in females finally into drumming.
Yes.
Um, I'm sure you have many more female students than
Oh,
you ever had.
huge, huge.
In the beginning of Drum Headquarters, again in 1981, we had one or two female students and customers, and in both cases they were the kind of women who said, I always wanted to play drums and the teacher or my parents or both wouldn't let me. And that went on for a number of years, and then we started seeing some younger girls. We never had younger ones. They were always 20 to 30. Then we started seeing some younger girls, maybe in the late 80s, and they would come in, but they felt like they felt uncomfortable. We did everything we could do to bring them in, but they would like kind of navigate around the periphery of the store. They were a little timid. And then 5 years later, we're up to like 20, 25% of our students are young girls. They come in, they got their sticks and their books, and you can tell from looking at them that they're saying, I belong here. That was a
Yes.
really cool phenomenon, but it
Sure.
took 15 years
Sure.
to
Sure.
see that grow to the point. And there weren't a lot of role models
That's right.
for
Right.
them the way there are today, from Cindy and Terry Lynn and Sheila E. and
Yes.
Emmanuel Caplet and all of them. I mean, that they didn't have the role models either.
Right.
So that's been a fantastic progression just for the art and for the business side of the industry.
Sure, sure. Because I mean, one hand feeds the other all the time, and it's a good thing for everybody because the more people play, the better the instruments, the more the teachers. So that it's a very cyclical thing, and also seeing people. One of the things that I found really interesting was we'd have kids in the school, taking drums, and the mother or the father, usually many times would be the mother waiting for the lessons. And then, a year or two later into their programs, the mother would comment and ask me, Aldo, I'm seeing my son practicing. It looks like so much fun. Maybe I should try this, right? I said, absolutely, you should. And then, not only that, then you're not screaming at each other, but you're talking drums. Great conversation stuff. But also later on, I mean, you might really enjoy this. So we have like several mothers who even surpass their own kids. And then the kids give up and take saxophone instead because the mother is better on drums than they are. But they keep on, and and they enjoy it. And then they start playing in the church. They start playing in bands. And I would say you'll be surprised. Somebody will invite you at a party or somewhere to sit in and you play, and they'll look at you like, where have you been? And you've been practicing all this time. Now the timing is right. You sat in, people saw you, and then you're in the band, right? But the greatest part of it is that I'm seeing a lot of is the parents, talking about female drummers, having that conversation with their kids on a musical level, which really changes because it's not just the home stuff or did you, did you get a job? It's more about, hey, did you hear Tony recently? Did you hear this other tune? I figured this out. What do you think? It takes the family dynamic to a whole other level. I think it's great. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And, when you think about, that journey that we all take and where it takes us, wherever it takes us, the basic principles are always the same, but always, I mean, it's interesting that it takes that spark, like it takes something, and we don't know what it is. I mean, for us, Ringo Starr, the whole Beatles thing was just a incredible. And I always ask Greg Bissonette, when they come to town, I always see the group, but I said to Greg, please tell Ringo never to stop. I mean, I think he's in his 80s, right? I say, as long as he's playing, we're still the kids, right?
Well, the other day, Steve Gadd was 80.
Right.
And he's still out there doing it.
He hasn't stopped. And he was here right in this studio when we had him here doing a Cosa Montreal right in our studio. And we said we're only 20 people and it's an afternoon.
That's an experience.
Yes. And then we talked about, playing, of course, but also seeing it up close, really close, and seeing Steve in action. And, I mean, I had the good fortune when I was studying at McGill. I used to go to New York every month and study with people. And I got to know Steve then when he was in his heyday.
Right.
So he used to take me around in his little Honda Civic. And then I would sit into the sessions. And I learned so much from, him and Bernard Purdy back then. And I got to know all of them. And I'd be like the fly in the wall for those sessions.
Right.
The other school, right? And Steve is still playing in great shape.
Sure.
I mean, like Ringo, amazing. It's like, so there's no end. And you talk about an example or somebody who shows the way. It can be done, right? By example.
Yeah, no, we always said to people like Kenny or Gadd or whomever it was, we want to be as good as what we do as you are as what you do. So I was inspired in business. Sure, I was inspired by other business people, but I was inspired by people doing something totally different just by observing the way they went about it and trying to adapt it to my experience. I mean, maybe because I was a player younger and I'm so into music, but I really get more inspiration from that, than the latest business craze or whatever.
Sure.
And also the experience of playing in a band, because that can't be underestimated, how important that is to learn how to work with people, how to resolve conflict, how to get to the greater good, and regardless of what it takes, and that you're just one cog in that wheel. I mean, I played in so many bands from age 13 or 14 to 30, um, that I know it helped me when I had employees. It helps me relate to my tenants. It helps me in everything I do.
In relationships. Yeah. No, very
Yeah,
well said. No,
totally,
you're
totally.
absolutely right. The team building, the team playing,
Right.
being a team player, period.
People talk about that in sports, and it's true, but there's usually a lot of adults around and it's more formalized. But in a band, you're kind of on your own, a bunch of kids or young adults flying by the seat of your pants, and you got to make it happen. You don't have an adult
True.
dictating or making sure that everything falls into place. You're really on your own.
Yeah.
And that was invaluable experience for me.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up because it is true. I mean, the different sports, of course, is a team thing, and then you have to play as a team. But
Right,
it's supervised on the early level. Of course, when you're
right,
NHL, then they have to play that. But that paradigm is exactly the same paradigm in
right,
music. And if you have that experience, I mean, it really helps. It's all transferable knowledge. I mean,
sure.
transferable tools that you have, that if they're great in one, being the arts, in business, the principles are more or less the same, right? Yeah. Anyway, we could talk forever, Rob, and we can. But I
I'm
really,
sure we could.
oh man, I'm so happy we were able to do this and get you on. I
Thanks.
want, to inspire some people who may not necessarily be in the music business, but it's all related. So the inspiration really should come from as many sources as possible, and from people who have done it. Yes, sometimes with a few scratches, the challenges everybody goes through, but we all have the stories. And how do you get through them? And how do you come to the other side and keep your sense of humor and just be a good person, be good at what you do? And then next, that's it's a great thing.
Right.
So I want to thank you so much. And as,
Thanks.
as I always say, to be continued.